No one saw it coming. Not from Tommy Rees, the calm, calculating, offensive mind who rarely showed emotion in public. For weeks, he'd kept quiet, even as the Browns' locker room started to split down the middle. But when the truth about what was happening behind closed doors finally surfaced, Rees couldn't hold it in any longer. What he exposed wasn't just a simple coaching disagreement. It was something far deeper, something that shook the very foundation of the Browns' organization. At the center of it all was Shedeur Sanders, the young quarterback who carried both the spotlight and the target on his back from the day he arrived. His name alone brought attention, pressure, and expectations most rookies could never handle. But it wasn't just the media or fans that were turning up the heat, it was his own team. And that's what made this story so disturbing. From the outside, everything looked normal. The Browns were selling a vision of unity and discipline, a team working toward something special. But inside, there were whispers. Strange patterns started to appear, questionable play calls, sudden changes in practice routines, veteran players mysteriously getting more reps while Shedeur was left watching from the sidelines. It didn't make sense unless someone wanted it that way. Tommy Rees, being the kind of coach who studies everything, noticed it first. He saw how small adjustments in the game plan subtly limited Shedeur's opportunities to succeed. He noticed how feedback from certain assistant coaches felt more like sabotage than mentorship. At first, he tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just internal politics, maybe it was paranoia. But the more he watched, the more it all lined up. Something wasn't right. Then came the breaking point. A late-night meeting turned into a heated argument that could be heard down the hall. Voices raised, accusations thrown. Rees confronted the staff about what he'd been seeing, the so-called dirty tactics designed to undermine their own quarterback. The room went silent. No one denied it outright, but no one defended it either. That silence told him everything. For Rees, that was the moment he realized loyalty to the game meant more than loyalty to the system. He wasn't about to stand by and watch a promising player be torn down from the inside. The next day, word spread that Rees had pulled the trigger, confronting leadership, exposing internal manipulation, and risking his career in the process. And just like that, everything changed. The Browns' image of stability crumbled overnight. Players started whispering about what was really going on. Insiders began leaking bits and pieces of the story, each one more shocking than the last. What started as quiet frustration had turned into a full-blown internal investigation. Because when Tommy Rees decided to speak up, it wasn't just about one quarterback. It was about exposing a culture that had gone unchecked for too long, and finally pulling back the curtain on what was really happening inside the Browns' locker room.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button.
When Shedeur Sanders stepped into the Cleveland Browns facility for the first time, it felt like a movie moment. Cameras flashing, reporters crowding the entrance, fans chanting his name before he'd even taken a snap. The son of day in prime time, Sanders wasn't just another rookie. He was a headline, a storyline, and a walking symbol of expectation. Everyone wanted to see what Shedeur would do in the NFL, but not everyone inside that building was rooting for him to succeed. The Browns had built their identity on grit, veterans who'd fought for every inch, coaches who prided themselves on control. And suddenly, here came a 22-year-old phenom with swagger, spotlight, and a famous last name. He wasn't just joining the team, he was changing its energy. Some players embraced it, others rolled their eyes. But behind the scenes, a quiet resistance started forming, small at first, almost invisible. It began with the tone in meetings. A few coaches questioned whether Shedeur was ready for the league. They said it casually, like harmless talk, but the message was clear. This kid needed to be humbled. Practices became tougher, drills more specific. Shedeur was often given less prep time than the veterans, yet was still expected to execute flawlessly. Mistakes that other players would brush off were magnified when he made them. And while the public narrative was glowing, Shedeur impresses in camp. Browns believe in their rookie QB. Internally, the vibe was different. Some coaches saw him as an outsider brought in by front office politics, a move designed to sell tickets and spark headlines. To them, Shedeur wasn't just competing for a spot, he was disrupting the hierarchy. Tommy Rees, however, saw something else. As the offensive mind tasked with building the future of the Browns' offense, he recognized Shedeur's raw intelligence and calm under pressure. He noticed how quickly Shedeur learned plays, how he adapted to the rhythm of NFL speed. But every time Shedeur made progress, there seemed to be another roadblock. A sudden scheme change, a strange benching during key scrimmages. Even in the film room, feedback felt pointed, less about growth and more about control. Rees started asking quiet questions. Why were practice reps being cut? Why was Shedeur being blamed for miscommunications that weren't his fault? The answers he got were vague, defensive, or flat-out dismissive. But the more he dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about football. It was about power. As the season inched closer, tension hung in the air. Shedeur stayed composed publicly, smiling in interviews and saying all the right things. But those close to him noticed the shift, the focus in his eyes, the frustration he tried to hide. He wasn't just fighting for a roster spot anymore. He was fighting against something bigger, a system quietly betting against him. And Tommy Rees? He was watching it all unfold, realizing that what was happening to Shedeur wasn't random at all. It was calculated, and it was about to boil over. What started as quiet tension soon turned into open conflict, not the kind fans see on the field, but the kind that poisons everything behind the scenes. The Browns' locker room, once known for its tight chemistry, began to fracture. Coaches who'd worked side by side for years were now split into camps, and at the center of it all stood Shedeur Sanders, the lightning rod for every disagreement that followed. It wasn't that Shedeur had done anything wrong. In fact, by most accounts, he was doing everything right, showing up early, studying film, taking accountability. But the whispers kept growing louder. Some coaches claimed he was being overhyped. Others accused him of being too confident for a rookie. Those words, spoken behind closed doors, carried weight, because in the NFL, perception becomes reality fast. Tommy Rees found himself in a tough spot. As offensive coordinator, he had to balance the egos in the room, protect his young quarterback while still keeping the coaching staff unified. But that balance was becoming impossible. Every team meeting felt like walking a tightrope. Suggestions from Rees about adjusting plays to suit Shedeur's strengths were brushed off. Calls for more consistent reps were met with silence or sarcasm. It was clear that certain people didn't want Rees, or Shedeur, to have that kind of influence. Even the players began to feel it. The offensive line was divided between veterans loyal to the old system and younger guys drawn to Shedeur's leadership. Some receivers quietly admitted they were confused by the constant changes in the game plan. Plays that worked one week suddenly scrapped the next. It was chaos disguised as strategy. Rumors started swirling that the coaching staff wasn't on the same page. Meetings ran late into the night, voices raised, tempers flaring. Rees noticed that discussions about performance were less about improving the team and more about assigning blame. Whenever Shedeur's name came up, the tone shifted, subtle digs, smirks, or dismissive remarks. It wasn't coaching anymore, it was politics. And the media, they began to sense something too. Reports of internal disagreements leaked, though no one could pinpoint why. On the surface, the Browns looked united, but insiders knew the truth. This was a full-blown power struggle. For Rees, it was a nightmare. He had joined Cleveland to build an innovative offense, but now he was stuck managing personalities more than playbooks. The organization that once promised a new era was falling into the same traps: ego, fear, and control. By the time midseason arrived, the tension was visible. Players avoided eye contact in team meetings. Assistant coaches stopped sharing notes. Rees could feel it in the air, that cold silence before something breaks. And he was right, because the deeper he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a disagreement over schemes or leadership. This was deliberate. Someone was pulling strings, manipulating the system from the inside, and Shedeur Sanders was the one paying the price. By the time whispers turned into evidence, Tommy Rees knew something was seriously wrong. What he discovered wasn't just miscommunication or ego, it was manipulation. Quiet, calculated, and aimed straight at the one player who'd done nothing but try to prove himself: Shedeur Sanders. At first, it looked like simple strategy differences. A few questionable play calls here and there, strange substitutions, or sudden changes during practice. But when those decisions started to consistently hurt Shedeur's rhythm, Reese began to see a pattern. Certain coaches were deliberately setting him up to fail. It was subtle, almost too subtle to catch, but over time, the puzzle pieces started to form a disturbing picture. One week, Shedeur would be told to focus on short throws in practice, then on game day. The entire offensive plan would shift to deep shots he hadn't repped. When he missed, the blame fell squarely on him. Another time, film sessions were conveniently rescheduled without his knowledge, leaving him out of key game prep. To outsiders, it looked like a rookie mistake. Inside the locker room, some knew better. Rumors suggest it went even deeper. Reports claim that certain assistants leaked clips of Shedeur's struggles to local media, hopping to paint him as unprepared or uncoachable. Anonymous sources began feeding stories to beat reporters, stories that conveniently made the coaching staff look blameless. The narrative was shifting. Shedeur wasn't being held back, he was holding the team back. Reese couldn't believe it. For years, he'd seen player politics in college football, but the NFL was supposed to be different, more professional, more controlled. Yet here he was, watching grown men use a 22-year-old quarterback as a scapegoat for their own insecurity. The irony, every time Shedeur stumbled, ticket sales and social media mentions spiked. The controversy was good for business. The final straw came during a closed practice scrimmage. According to insiders, Shedeur was given a new set of signals just hours before the session, signals that didn't match what the receivers were taught. The result? Misreads, fumbles, chaos. Coaches shook their heads on the sidelines, muttering about his lack of preparation. Reese was furious. He knew exactly what had happened, and this time he wasn't staying silent. Behind closed doors, he confronted one of the staff members he believed was responsible. The exchange was tense. Accusations, denials, raised voices. But there was no mistaking it anymore. The dirty tactics were real, and they were tearing the team apart from within. After that day, Reese began documenting everything: texts, meeting notes, odd play-calling shifts. He wasn't building a case for the media, he was protecting his player. Because if things continued this way, Shedeur's reputation could be ruined before his career even started. And for the Browns, that wasn't just a scandal, it was a time bomb. Because once those secrets got out, no amount of PR spin could save them. If you're enjoying this video and loving the content, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up. It really helps us know what you want to see more of. And why keep all the excitement to yourself? Share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who loves NFL drama. Tommy Reese had always been known for his composure. No shouting on the sidelines, no emotional outbursts, no drama. He was the definition of calm under pressure. But everyone has a breaking point, and Reese finally reached his. What pushed him over the edge wasn't just the sabotage itself. It was the silence surrounding it. The way everyone in the building knew something was off, yet no one had the courage to say it out loud. For weeks, he'd watched Shedeur Sanders take the hits, literally and figuratively. Bad play calling, public criticism, rumors swirling online. Every time Shedeur showed resilience, another roadblock appeared. To Reese, it felt like a test. How far could they push the kid before he cracked? But Shedeur never broke. He kept showing up early, staying late, and doing his job. And that quiet determination only made the injustice harder to stomach. The final straw came during a tense post-game meeting. The Browns had just lost a winnable game, one that had exposed every flaw Reese had been warning about for weeks. The offensive line looked disorganized, the routes sloppy, and the playbook a mess. When Reese entered the room, he expected accountability. Instead, he walked into a blame session. A few coaches, the same ones he suspected of manipulating things behind the scenes, started pointing fingers at Shedeur. "He's not ready," one of them said. Another added, "He's holding the offense back." Reese had heard enough. He slammed his notebook shut and called it out right there. He laid out everything: the altered play calls, the practice games designed to embarrass Shedeur, the internal leaks to the media. The room went dead silent. No one spoke. Eyes darted around, but no one met his gaze. That's when he realized the truth. The system was protecting itself, and the only person who would suffer was the one who didn't deserve it. When Reese walked out of that room, something in him had changed. He wasn't just an offensive coordinator anymore, he was a man on a mission. A mission to expose what was happening, no matter the cost. Reports say he went straight to upper management, demanding answers. Others claim he confronted certain coaches directly, warning them that their games were over. Whatever the exact sequence, one thing was clear: Reese had pulled the trigger. The next morning, whispers started spreading across the facility. Something had gone down. Players could feel the tension. Coaches avoided eye contact. Reese didn't say a word, but everyone knew what had happened. He'd broken the unwritten rule, don't expose your own. But in that moment, Reese didn't care about politics or image. He cared about the truth. Because if he didn't speak up now, Shedeur's career could be destroyed before it even began. And that wasn't something Tommy Reese was willing to watch happen. What he didn't know was that by taking that stand, he'd set off a chain reaction that no one, not even him, could control. The morning after Tommy Reese confronted the coaching staff, the Browns' facility felt different. The usual chatter in the hallways was gone. Players walked quietly through the corridors, coaches whispered behind closed doors, and every meeting carried an uncomfortable weight. Something had clearly shifted, and everyone knew why. Reese had crossed a line that no one dared approach in the NFL. He'd challenged the system from within. At first, the front office tried to contain it. They treated it like an internal misunderstanding, a heated discussion blown out of proportion. But word travels fast in pro football, and this wasn't just a rumor. Reese's confrontation had become the talk of the locker room. Players who once kept their heads down started asking questions. Why was Shedeur being treated differently? Why were some coaches suddenly defensive about practice schedules? It was as if Reese's defiance had opened the floodgates. Within days, whispers turned into investigations. Meetings were held late into the night. Front office executives pulled staffers aside for one-on-one discussions, trying to figure out how deep the dysfunction ran. Behind closed doors, they weren't just questioning what happened, they were questioning who leaked it. Because somehow, details of the internal drama were starting to leak to local reporters. The media didn't have the full story yet, but headlines were beginning to hint at coaching friction and philosophical differences. The Browns' PR team went into overdrive. Official statements were carefully worded, focusing on unity and growth. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. A few days later, it happened: quiet firings. No press conferences, no formal announcements. Just a few assistant coaches who mutually parted ways with the team. Insiders claimed they were the very people Reese had accused of undermining Shedeur. The front office called it restructuring. Everyone else knew better. Reese, meanwhile, kept his distance. He wasn't celebrating or gloating, he looked exhausted. The weight of what he'd done hung heavy on his shoulders. Players respected him for standing up, but some also feared what might come next. The Browns had always been an organization where loyalty mattered, and Reese had challenged that loyalty in the most public way possible. For Shedeur, the fallout was complicated. On one hand, things finally started to feel fair. Practice reps stabilized, communication improved, and the offense began to run smoother. But he couldn't ignore the tension, the silent stares from certain coaches, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room. The damage was done. The Browns' reputation took a hit, too. Media outlets began piecing the story together, framing it as another chapter in the franchise's long history of internal dysfunction. Fans debated whether Reese was a hero or a troublemaker. Some called it the start of a cultural reset, others called it a betrayal. But one thing was certain: the moment Reese decided to expose the truth, the Browns were never the same again. The cracks that had been hidden behind locker room doors were now out in the open, and there was no turning back. Through all the chaos, one person stood at the center of the storm without ever saying much: Shedeur Sanders. While the headlines screamed about coaching controversy and internal dysfunction, Shedeur kept his head down and focused on football. No interviews, no outbursts, no public reactions, just quiet determination. But behind that calm exterior, people close to the team say Shedeur was feeling every ounce of pressure and every whisper that came with it. For Shedeur, this wasn't just about football anymore. It was personal. From the moment he was drafted, critics had been waiting for him to fail, calling him overhyped. A coach's son, a kid writing his father's name. He'd spent his entire life proving doubters wrong, and now, in the NFL, that same battle was happening all over again, only this time. It wasn't just outside noise. It was coming from inside the building. Still, Shedeur never snapped. He responded the only way he knew how, by working harder. Coaches and teammates noticed him spending extra hours in the film room, studying defenses long after others had left. He started calling his own mini-meetings with younger receivers, building chemistry and trust. To them, he wasn't a spoiled rookie. He was a leader trying to rise above the politics. When the dirty tactics story started leaking, Shedeur stayed quiet publicly but made one thing clear privately. He wanted change, not revenge. Sources close to the team say he told Reese he didn't want anyone fired for his sake. He just wanted a fair shot to compete. That attitude earned him quiet respect among players who'd seen too many young QBs crack under pressure. But even with the firings and internal shakeups, Shedeur's path wasn't easy. The media started twisting the narrative, framing him as the problem child who divided the Browns' coaching staff. Every move he made was overanalyzed. Every sideline expression turned into a headline. Even his social media posts were dissected for hidden meaning. One cryptic tweet that read, "You can't silence the truth," sent sports talk shows into a frenzy. Inside the locker room, though, something was shifting. Players began rallying around him. Veterans who had once been skeptical started backing his leadership. The offense started to gel again, not perfect, but unified. For the first time in months, there was belief that maybe, just maybe, they could turn things around. Reese became Shedeur's quiet ally, not just as a coach, but as a mentor. He shielded him from the worst of the media chaos and made sure he stayed focused on what mattered, football. And Shedeur rewarded that loyalty by performing under pressure, proving that talent and resilience could rise above the noise. In a league where perception often defines careers, Shedeur was rewriting his own story. He wasn't just the quarterback caught in the middle of a scandal. He was the reason the truth came to light. And though the road ahead would be tough, one thing was clear. They couldn't keep him down forever. When the news broke about the Browns' internal chaos, the firings, the reports of dirty tactics, and the role Shedeur Sanders had quietly played in exposing it, the entire league stopped and took notice. What started as another team controversy suddenly turned into a national talking point. Sports networks were running 24-hour coverage, with analysts debating whether Shedeur had been a victim, a whistleblower, or a calculated disruptor in a broken organization. Across the NFL, reactions were mixed. Some coaches and executives privately applauded what happened, saying it was about time someone inside the system stood up against manipulation and favoritism. Others saw it as dangerous, a rookie quarterback indirectly challenging the establishment, breaking the unspoken rule that players don't call out coaches, no matter what happens behind the scenes. Either way, it was impossible to ignore. On talk shows, opinions were loud and divided. Stephen A. Smith called it a wake-up call for the NFL. You can't play politics when talent on the line. Meanwhile, other analysts argued Shedeur had unintentionally created a distraction, putting unnecessary heat on a team that was already fragile. But fans, they were a different story. Online, hashtags like Free Shedeur and Browns Mess trended for days. Clips of his best plays flooded social media with captions like, "They tried to hold him back, now they can't stop him." Inside team circles, Shedeur's reputation quietly shifted. He wasn't just Deion Sanders' son anymore. He was the guy who'd faced down chaos and kept his composure. Several rival players even reached out privately, offering support. One veteran quarterback reportedly told him, "You did what most of us never could. You spoke the truth without saying a word." Front offices were paying attention, too. Execs across the league began rethinking how much control certain coaching staffs had over player development. Some saw the Browns' situation as a warning sign. If a young QB as disciplined as Shedeur could be caught in that kind of dysfunction, no rookie was safe from internal politics. Even league officials were rumored to have taken interest, quietly monitoring how Cleveland handled the aftermath. The NFL doesn't like distractions that damage the brand, and the Browns were quickly becoming one. Suddenly, reports surfaced that upper management had been encouraged to stabilize the franchise and restore public trust fast. Meanwhile, Shedeur went back to work. No interviews, no public statements, just focus. The league could debate all it wanted, but he knew what mattered most: the next game. And when he stepped on the field, fans noticed something different. He played freer, sharper, and more confident than ever. By the end of the season, it wasn't just about redemption. It was about respect. Around the league, whispers turned into acknowledgement. Shedeur Sanders wasn't just surviving in the NFL, he was starting to define it. When the dust finally settled, the Browns were almost unrecognizable from the team that had entered the season in chaos. Coaches were gone, new faces had stepped in, and the front office was scrambling to repair its image. But through it all, one truth became impossible to deny: Shedeur Sanders had changed the narrative. What began as whispers of dysfunction ended as a full-blown transformation of how the organization operated. Tommy Rees, the man who'd risked his career by standing his ground, suddenly found himself praised as a no-nonsense leader who wouldn't tolerate corruption behind the scenes. Analysts who once questioned his experience now credited him for the Browns' renewed discipline and culture shift. Rees had turned from a scapegoat into a symbol of integrity, the kind of coach players wanted to fight for. For Shedeur, the aftermath was more complicated. He'd earned respect, yes, but he'd also drawn permanent attention. Every throw, every comment, every move he made was now magnified. The media painted him as both hero and villain, a lightning rod for conversation. Some said he had too much influence for a rookie. Others argued he'd simply done what any great leader would do: expose the truth when no one else had the courage to. Behind closed doors, Shedeur kept his circle small. Sources say his main focus became development, mastering his playbook, studying tape, and tightening his leadership style. Those close to him said he was tired of headlines and just wanted the work to speak for itself. But whether he liked it or not, he'd become a symbol not just of talent, but of defiance against the NFL's political machine. The Browns organization faced an identity crisis. Fans demanded transparency, the front office promised reform, and ownership vowed a new era of accountability. But rebuilding trust takes time. Insiders say the team held multiple closed-door meetings aimed at reshaping the internal power dynamic, ensuring no coach or executive could ever manipulate the system again. And yet there was an unspoken question lingering in every conversation. What happens if Shedeur wins? If he turned the Browns into contenders, it would validate everything: his decisions, Rees, loyalty, the firings, and the drama that shook the team to its core. But if he failed, critics would circle back, ready to claim the chaos had cost Cleveland its future. As the next season loomed, tension mixed with hope. Training camp footage showed a calmer, more united team, players laughing, coaches connecting, and Shedeur leading huddles with quiet confidence. The scars were still there, but so was the hunger to prove everyone wrong. The Browns weren't just rebuilding a football team, they were rebuilding a reputation. And at the center of it all stood Shedeur Sanders, the rookie who walked through the fire and refused to break. The league would be watching closely, because if Shedeur succeeded after everything that happened, it wouldn't just be a comeback story, it would be a statement.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.